Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere
Cosmere Conversations.
Hello, welcome back everyone. We are once again exploring the lost metal, and this time we're getting real nerdy, real down into the details of specifically the lost metal and all the metals that we got in Mistborn Era 2 Book 4.
Yeah, we got a lot of new information about all of the various metallurgic powers, different things that are being explored. Obviously, a lot to do with two metals in particular, Trellium and Harmonium. And that's what we're diving in on today. These two specific god metals. We're going to have Metallurgy Part 2, going through some of the other discoveries in the Lost Metal coming at your feed in the future. For today, we're going to focus on these god metals.
Lots of speculation was leading up to the release of the Lost Metal. What is going to be that important answer to the question, what is the Lost Metal? Originally, we had talked way back in Mistborn Era 1 about Electrum being the 11th metal that Kelsier was searching for in the story, the 11th metal. And really what that concept introduces is that the rule of 10 that they are currently operating under is wrong.
Right.
And what we have learned since that point is just how deep the rabbit hole goes of metallurgic powers, metallurgic combinations, compounding. All of these other aspects of metallurgy are kind of leading us to the big question of what are these god metals, what can they do, and what happens when they combine?
Yeah, and it's kind of endlessly complex because, now we have Harmonium, which didn't exist in Era 1, of course, because Harmony didn't exist. And then if a new shard is introduced to the system, as it is, the shard Autonomy going by Trell, you then also have a new god metal for that shard, which we see. And we see a little bit more about those two metals' qualities and how they interact. And I think we've seen, especially with Harmonium, that the god metals do have some pertinence to the shard itself.
Yeah, the more correct the shard is, the more in balance the metal is. There's some aspect that we think maybe is wrong with Harmony, and therefore perhaps something wrong with the metal.
Just a way that the metal presents in its physical form that is reflective of what's going on with the shard cognitively / spiritually.
Let's start out, though, with Trellium, which Harmony himself name drops as Babadinium. Pronunciation always my strong suit. But
yeah.
What do you think about this Babadinium?
Yeah, that's how I would say it. Babadinium. And Harmony does say that would be the appropriate name, although he's one to talk because he also does not call his metal by its appropriate name, which would be something like Sazdium.
Exactly. The name of the vessel instead of the name of the shard is
right.
Normally how the metals are spoken about in world. However, for ease, Trellium, Babadinium, whichever you use, that's okay with us. We get a little bit about the physical properties, and then, of course, the very explosive combination is what this is all leading to. But tell us a little bit just about the metal itself.
Trellium is very hard. It's just above a 9 on the hardness scale, which means it's close to the hardness of a diamond. I believe it's mentioned that a diamond is able to scratch it, like just barely, but they are very close in terms of hardness. It's also very brittle, and it has a melting point of over 2,500 degrees.
We also have this directly from the text, quote, "Perhaps," Steris said, "these metals, unlike common ones, don't change states based on temperature, but on other factors," end quote. So we do see the temperature as one indicator of change with these metals, but there is also this hint that there may be other factors going on as well.
Right. She's saying that because it is a god metal, that may be why it is not reacting as you would expect a regular metal to under physical pressures like temperature.
That makes a lot of sense that the normal aspects of the physical world, temperature, pressure, don't necessarily impact the god metals as you would expect metals of that type. Like even diamonds, being very hard, react to and are created by temperature and pressure. The god metals seem resistant to that in, I think, the same way that pushing on the metals inside someone's body is difficult for an allomancer. It's like the physical world isn't quite able to push on the god metals in the same way that you would expect.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. Trellium also has the very interesting property of reacting to other sources of investiture in a way that is similar to what we would expect from magnets that have the same charge. So they repel. Trellium repels other elementic metals, and then it's also repelled when wax uses investiture near it.
That simple fact is kind of messing with my mind because I'm trying to figure out why.
Because autonomy wants to be alone, and so it pushes everything away.
Autonomy's investiture, it would make sense, is kind of repelling other types of investiture. So let's just run through like a quick little bit. If I had a Stormlight gem and I dropped it right next to a spike, the Trellium spike that Palm uses, would it have enough force to push that gem away, do you think?
Yes.
Okay. And if there is a spren, are they not allowed to go near that spike? Like, would it push away a spren in the same way it would something physical?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and I think
it's the investiture.
Right, exactly. I think this is going to come back to our physics rules of like regular allomancy use as well, where if you are the heaviest thing, if you are heavier than the thing you're pushing, then the thing will move. But if the thing is heavier than you will be pushed backwards. So, for example, I think if a spike was trying to repel a spren, it may be the spike that is displaced rather than the spren.
Interesting.
But it is still, it's doing the same thing.
Of course, yeah.
This is super interesting because it can be an investiture alarm, basically.
Yeah.
Like they can use this metal to tell them when someone nearby is using investiture because it would move.
You would think that wax burning the metal would be different than just the metal sitting next to Trellium. Like it has to be some type of investiture awakening that is triggering that repelling. So I think an alarm is the most basic version, but there's a lot of potential uses, almost maybe as many as just the uses of electromagnetism in general. Like we manipulate electromagnetism in a near infinite number of ways now. Could you manipulate the Trellium investiture nisium in the exact same way?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you said something important in there, though, that you kind of glossed over, and I want to pull it out for our audience because it's an important thing to remember. There's a difference between, let's say, a piece of steel sitting next to a piece of Trellium and Trellium being next to wax when he is burning steel.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Because the metal itself is not invested. The investiture is happening when wax is burning it. That's different from a sphere from Rashar, which is filled with investiture.
Yeah, so I think
there's going to be a different reaction there.
A normal piece of steel should have no reaction to Trellium.
Right.
But any type of invested entity like a spren would immediately send out the warning.
Or even a better comparison, I think, a piece of steel versus a metal mind or a hemalurgic spike that has been spiked through somebody. The metal mind and the spike will be repelled the piece of steel will not be repelled.
Great call, and great to keep it all on world. Very smart. There's also the physical property can be looked at by a spectroscope or using...
Spectroscopy
is the science of looking at it, the actual physical act.
Which is measuring the wavelengths of light that are emitted by something, is my understanding of it.
Would be very helpful on Nalthis for many reasons. When you use a spectroscope to look at Trellium, there is the reflection of off-the-chart red.
So it shows the full spectrum of colors at maximum. And then on the red end, it is so high that it's over the maximum. It goes off the chart.
Oh, interesting. So it's a full spectrum polychrome.
Yes.
But then ultra red.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think it's Steris who says that god metals show the full spectrum. That's how you know it's a god metal. Regular metals will generally be like one or two colors or like a small range of colors. They know it's a god metal when it shows the full spectrum. And then this particular one is, yes, ultra red, which I wonder if that is indicating infrared. I don't know really anything about spectroscopy, so I don't know if it already measures infrared or if that would be something that they couldn't measure, and then that is what like off the chart in the red side would mean. If we have any scientists out there who know more about spectroscopy, tell us what we're missing.
I do think that the basic idea would allow for the full spectrum as we know it, which would include infrared. It wouldn't stop at the visible spectrum only, because, for example, I think they got one attached to the James Webb Space Telescope, and we often use it in those types of things where colors don't really make sense in the visible spectrum, but the whole full spectrum is what those types of devices are capturing. But this is a great opportunity for you to correct us and tell us what's going on with Trellium. I guess you also have to be an expert in Scadrian metals and magic systems.
Well,
so
not necessarily.
If you have all of those different skills, please write in. It'll be great.
And this is specifically what Steris says, if this is helpful. Quote, "And this metal," Steris said, "somehow projects a full spectrum, as if it were made of pure white light. But it also has something strange happening in the red, as if it had a light beyond what the machine can calculate or read." End quote.
So I do think this one may come down to their machine more than an inability to read.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just their machine is not tuned, or...
I mean, that's also my other question, because sure, there might be a spectroscopy reader on the James Webb Space Telescope, but if we were, you know, in the early 1900s or whatever, where Steris and wax are generally supposed to be, like, did we even know about infrared? I don't know. Like, maybe their machine is just not technologically savvy enough.
Because they don't even know that it's a thing that they can look for.
Yeah.
What we can say is that done with several, if you could bring every god to Scadrial and they all produced a metal in their name, I think that they would all react this way. For example, full spectrum light, but then a spike in one different color. So honor would spike in blue, cultivation would spike in green.
Well, Brandon has said that some shards have a greater affinity for a specific color than others. So I don't know if every single shard would show that. I think that autonomy has been clearly established to have an affinity for red, and there may be other shards that have like specific strong affinities for colors. But we don't know that that is going to be the same for every color. What we do know would be the same for every shard would be the full spectrum pure white light. Yeah.
To me, this leads to some aspect of the metal being a direct conduit to the spiritual realm through the shard/vessel. Somehow, you know, their physical or their investiture power is physically manifesting itself as this metal.
Exactly. We're going to talk a little bit more about this rules of physics on Scadrial or in the Cosmere in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit more about Harmonium now, so we can sort of get the full picture of these god metals on Scadrial.
When it comes to the physical qualities, Harmonium is unable to be fully melted, but it can be burned in small flakes.
So similar to Trellium, very difficult to affect these metals, again, with any type of physical pressure on them. It is pliable, similar to gold, though, Harmonium is. So it's not as brittle as Trellium. Obviously, it has the similar spectroscopy to Trellium without that red jump. They don't really say anything super specific about the spectroscopy of Harmonium. My guess is that this is because my impression is that Harmonium's closest color affinity is black and white, like a yin-yang type thing, which isn't really applicable to spectroscopy.
Certainly not in the same way. Interesting of note is that Harmonium is unaffected by any acid type that they can throw at it. And once again, how much of that is the physical resistance versus the investiture or spiritual power resistance?
Well, I don't think there's a difference because, like you just said, this is simply an investiture made physical.
And at the same time, it is also, or different metals are reacting differently. The idea of being pliable like gold, which is, of course, very pliable and used in all sorts of different applications, it would be incredibly interesting. For example, like, can you take a little bit of Harmonium and put it into a really basic version of their computer or cell phone? Or can you create like an infinite battery machine if you are able to turn Harmonium into wires or some other type of circuit?
Oh.
Like, if it is pliable, then it, seemingly is workable, but then you can do way more physical damage than should otherwise be possible. For example, like burning out a computer chip is something that can happen here. But theoretically, Harmonium would never burn out. You could just
because it's so resilient.
Exactly, but still pliable.
That's very interesting.
So the application of these metals in fabrials or technology is obviously where my mind is going, because we have seen the importance of things like aluminum on fabrial development and what that allows is possible for.
I mean, just practically, you probably don't want to use Harmonium in your technologies because it will explode.
Even small amounts of moisture.
Anything. It reacts to the air. They have to keep it in vials of oil to prevent it from reacting just with the air.
Okay. I thought that it was the moisture in the air that it was reacting to. I'll have to double back and check in on that. Let's continue because there's a lot of, we'll say, spiritual weirdness hinted at when it comes to Harmonium.
Definitely. Harmonium is unable to be divided, quote, as long as harmony remains harmony, end quote. We've talked about this a little bit in the lead up to this book, but Harmonium is not actually an alloy in, a weird magical way, basically. Quote, harmony held both ruin and preservation, so somehow this metal was both atium and lerasium blended in a way that defied ordinary scientific explanation, end quote.
And in Wax and Steris's experiments, they tried acid, heat, and electrolysis, none of which had an impact, but electrolysis did generate some change. It was the closest to making a dent on it. And so I'm very curious about how electricity and Harmonium could intermix in the future.
Yeah, it is interesting, like why electricity? What does that mean in like the bigger sense? Interesting questions. Harmonium is able to be softened and then manipulated. So like we said, it is pliable, and the electrolysis allows them to soften it up. They do that thing where they try to like pull it apart a little bit so that it's sort of stringy in the middle with like two little globs on the sides. And we get a couple of these quotes, quote, "When softened like this, it seemed to react differently to the air, no longer as volatile, as if it were becoming something else," end quote. And it's described as the two sides beginning to take on qualities of lerasium and atium, as if they are like rearranging their compositions, which is so interesting.
And that is, of course, only as the material is stretching out.
Right. They're still connected.
Exactly. The moment the actual division happens and that harmonium kind of like drips apart fully, they instantly rearrange themselves and revert fully back to harmonium. So you have two normal pieces of harmonium, but it was in that stretching that they started to like work themselves back to be lerasium and atium. And of course, that is also what we get via the explosion with Trellium. We'll talk a lot about that, but I'm kind of curious what your first take is on the why here, or what is going on with harmonium.
I think it's reflective of the shard, as we've said. Like, it is one shard, Sayazed is harmonium, but it is also preservation and ruin. And so it is both. They can't be, or the metal cannot be fully divided because harmony exists and the two shards are meshed together. And so until the two shards are separated, the metal cannot separate because it is only a physical manifestation of the investiture.
This brings up so many questions, and my brain is just spinning at 1,000 miles per hour trying to answer them all. Of course, we don't have the answer, and that's the point. But I am intrigued by the possibility, beginning with the thought process that harmony is wrong, and everything harmony is doing is wrong, and taking that to the metal itself. It's almost like an illusion of a metal. It's a metal tricking you into thinking that it's something that it's not. These two different pieces that are just like playing together, but they are always separate things.
I think that is what you're describing, though, would be an alloy. This is more like the molecules of the two different things have come apart and recombined, sharing all of their little elements and pieces to create something different out of the building blocks of the molecules of lerasium and atium.
My supposition, my guess, is that this is almost like an illusion because of Zazed, because of the vessel. That with his great godly power... You think that
harmony does not exist? There is
correct.
Only preservation and ruin?
I think by the force of harmony, we have like created something new, as you were saying, but that thing is not real. It is more of an illusion.
Do you think that that's only because the shards are out of balance?
Yeah, like, I don't necessarily think it's...
If they had the exact same amount of power, would harmony be quote-unquote real to you?
Yes, I think it would be possible that harmony could exist, but as it currently is, it's like a default setting of this cannot exist. And so everything after that has to be some type of sham, some type of
I don't buy
forgery.
That.
Because
I think that harmony exists. It is simply subject to entropy, a very, very slow entropy. But harmony does exist. It's just being very, very slowly eroded over time in favor of ruin. Yeah.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that harmony doesn't exist.
I think that is exactly what it means. I
don't think that makes any sense.
You described it, not me. I think that what you just said means that by definition, the only thing that exists in that circumstance is discord, is the decay, and this is the innate problem with preservation and ruin, is that they are imbalance.
Right, but if you imagine them on, two sides of a teeter-totter, they may start perfectly level, and that is harmony.
Right.
Yes, and then it's just slowly tilting to one side over time. Once it like tilts past a certain point, then harmony becomes discord.
Okay, so you're saying that for this time, harmony can exist, but harmony cannot exist forever.
Yes, until it becomes discord. But that's not harmony becoming preservation and ruin.
Interesting.
Those are two different things.
Well, I think that if there is that description of a teeter-totter and ruin is slightly heavier, then by definition, ruin will win out. But
it is not ruin just because it's winning. Because it's winning, harmony becomes discord. It's not because ruin is winning, the two shards will split apart into preservation and ruin again. The only way you can say that it is preservation and ruin completely separately is if they are shattered apart, and presumably there would be another vessel for one of them.
Yeah, I would think that on a long enough timeline, the ruin side of the equation wins out.
Will get stronger,
right,
or will be stronger.
At which point it will then reject completely the preservation part. Like, we imagine...
You think that they're going to explode apart?
No.
Harmonium.
Imagine exactly what Wax and Stairs are doing. We're using lots of hand gestures in this part of the podcast. But imagine what they are doing with that scientific experiment when they're pulling apart the metals. I'm saying that is also happening naturally. The metals are being pulled apart naturally by the imbalance.
No, because there's an element that we haven't spoken about yet, which I think is important.
Okay.
That is in the text.
Let's go to the text.
Which is similar to on Rashar, you have to have an emulsifier. Because even though Harmonium is extremely reactive and it's ready to explode at any moment, it doesn't do that just sitting by itself. You have to introduce another element in order for it to explode. You have to introduce Trellium or autonomy in order to make autonomous the two pieces that are making up harmony. So it's not going to break apart just by itself by nature of ruin and preservation being combined.
But
the only way that they're going to break apart is if something else is introduced. For example, if autonomy were to come and slam into harmony and split harmony apart back into preservation and ruin. Left on its own, even though ruin is getting more strong, harmony is only going to turn into discord, not break apart.
Okay, I hear where you're coming from. I think that the fact that harmony cannot exist with any aspect of the world, water on down, but cannot interact with any aspect of the world is all the demonstration that we as readers need to know that something is very wrong with it. If it was stable, then it would be an example of harmony. Because it is unstable, it is an example of discord. It is already discord. The properties, like we should be calling this discordium. Of course, we should always just be calling it Zazium, but its proper name at this time, because the only thing that's ever existed from the moment that Zazed picked up both shards is discord.
I disagree. This is the first time that we've even seen the dark shadow behind harmony.
And we didn't see it before because he kept it
We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves because we're going to do an entire episode about
the dark shadow,
harmony, and autonomy.
This is supposed to be just focused on his metal, but I think that it's where...
This is the first time that we've seen that shadow because over time he is getting closer to turning into discord. At some point that shadow is going to come to the fore and be prevalent, at which point he will be fully discord. But because it is still in the background, he is not fully discord. At some point, he was fully harmony and there was no shadow. And then over time, the shadow has become more and more prominent.
Okay. I think that we just have a fundamental disagreement about the starting point for the entity we called harmony, because the imbalance is the dark shadow. The second that there were...
Oh, I think the dark shadow is discord.
I agree. And I think that
which didn't exist before.
It existed the second both shards were picked up by a single individual because they were always imbalanced. There was never any balance. But
there was like one molecule of shadow.
Exactly.
That has grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes. And then
but it's still in the background.
My guess is that as soon as that shadow is powerful enough, that shadow's not discord. That shadow is ruin's imbalance. It's the gap between ruin and preservation is the shadow.
It's the other side of the coin. If Sazed is, heads, then the shadow is tails, the shadow being discord, and the coin flips at some point to go from harmony to discord. Same coin, just the other side is on top.
Interesting. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think. Let's get back, though, to the combination of these two metals, Trellium and Harmonium, and the reaction that it creates, because this is fundamental danger that Wax and the people of Scadrian are under in the Lost Metal, is this threat of Trellium Harmonium bomb.
Mm-hmm.
We need a cooler name for it.
It needs a shorthand.
Is a cool name.
Can it be like a TH bomb?
Ooh, that's pretty good. TH bomb's, not bad.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
We're going to call it the TH bomb for now. But you guys let us know if there is...
Is there a better name?
Probably. But the TH bomb is, the big threatening item in the Lost Metal. And we get just a hint of the power that is capable when Trellium and Harmonium interact.
This starts to get really interesting, and we start to learn a little bit more, again, about... It's kind of realmatic theory, but not really. It's like realmatic physics, sort of. Vendel says that Wax's experiment that he did, heating and stretching Harmonium before touching it with Trellium, created, quote, an invested matter-energy transference, end quote.
Okay, to me, a matter-energy transference is like a thing, in this case, Harmonium, is physical matter and made up of a bunch of energy, E equals MC squared and all that jazz. And what Wax was able to do was basically like inverse and reverse those facts, swapping out the energy and the matter and vice versa, kind of triggering a unlocking in the same way that metal and appropriate DNA allows for unlocking into the spiritual realm. Wax was able to just do that. And I believe this is why Harmony referenced at one point, like, I don't know what this explosion will do. It could destroy the entire atmosphere, because that's the chain reaction and the same thing that Oppenheimer and the people of the Manhattan Project were originally fearful of, setting off a chain reaction from their weapon could just continue. The reaction would not stop.
Well, I think in this case, the physical matter is turning back into spiritual investiture, and that conversion has energy as a byproduct, which is the explosion. Let's read some quotes, though, because they might shed some light on what we've got here. First one, quote, this level of energy release could only happen if some of the investiture or matter itself was transformed into energy, end quote. Okay, good. See, so good we read that. Opposite of what I just said. Either matter or investiture is turning into energy.
If some of the investiture or matter itself was transformed into energy. In this case, when we're talking about a god metal, matter and investiture are kind of the same thing. As we said, this is just a physical manifestation of immense investiture.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is, to me, in many respects, just unlocking directly to the spiritual realm. And then it is if the force and power of the spiritual realm is just able to be channeled through that explosive effort. And it's like, oops.
Oh, you
we
think
didn't mean
it's
to open
a
that up.
spiritual explosion?
I do. I think that there is, that movement of spiritual energy through the cognitive and then into the physical world is the release, in my estimation, that this is a kind of accidental situation of like, we opened up the wrong door here.
Well, let's read this other quote and see if that tells us more about what's happening.
Got it. It is, quote, investiture, matter, and energy are all the same fundamentally, and states can change from one to the other. Energy can become investiture. This is the soul of Furukume. Investiture can become matter. That is where harmonium comes from. And matter can become energy, end quote. We have there a description of the three realms and then kind of combining that with the more normal words that we would use. We have energy, investiture, and matter.
Mm-hmm.
Energy, investiture, and matter. Kind of like spiritual realm, cognitive realm, and physical realm.
Yeah, kind of.
To me, what is most important is this concept of they can change states.
Mm-hmm.
Just as matter can change physical states when under pressure or temperature, it can go from a solid to a liquid to a gas.
Mm-hmm.
Here, we're saying that they can move from energy to investiture to matter and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think this is a great depiction because we've seen some of this, as the quote says. We have seen Furukume, we have seen, the spiritual aspect of a shard becoming a metal, so going from investiture to matter. But the addition of energy, or like the connection between matter and energy, and the shift there, the conversion that can happen there, is something that we haven't really seen until this point. So that's sort of the news.
Well, I think that we may have some inkling of this power on display. It is the remnants, in my estimation, of what was accidentally discovered on Ashen. Some type of mistake regarding the transfer of matter to energy. I don't want to speculate too much on like the why or the how, but if they unleashed and unlocked this type of power, potentially through a bondsmith-esque character who is able to move and transfer and like be the cause of matter becoming energy or energy becoming matter, the potential destruction from accidentally or misusing that ability is, planet level destroying possible.
Maybe. Of course, all of this begs the question, what the heck is going on with Lerasium and ATM? Because although we have had this entire discussion about how Harmonium cannot be divided into ATM and Lerasium, Harmony cannot be divided into Preservation and Ruin, there is a tiny, tiny bit of these old god metals that are created by the explosion. Quote, it appears that if you detonate Harmonium against Trellium, it creates some small amount of ATM as a byproduct, end quote. We later find out that it also creates a tiny bit of Lerasium as well, which Wax inhales and is collected to give to Wayne.
So despite the fact that we've been saying that Harmonium can't be separated and that ATM and Lerasium are one thing now in Harmonium, we also have clear example that that is not correct. That ATM and Lerasium are able to come from Harmonium and are able to divide out completely back.
Not really, though, because it's like a tiny amount of dust. It's like maybe a fingertip of dust,
Yeah,
like
so
I don't know if I would
that
say
Harmonium and Trellium.
Oh, that's ATM.
But it is enough ATM to sustain good friend Marsh, brings him back to health. It is enough Lerasium to make Wax and Wayne weak Mistborns.
According to you.
Are they?
They are Mistborns, but we don't know if they are quote unquote weak Mistborn.
Got it. Okay. I remove that aspect from the conversation. They are Mistborns, clearly, but there is also this statement from Vandel in the beginning that Harmonium cannot be divided as long as Harmony remains Harmony.
Mm-hmm.
If we take my hypothesis as being correct, that Harmony is not Harmony, Harmony is Discord, then we have clear evidence, and we take Vandel's statement as accurate, that if harmony remains harmony, lerasium and atium can never recombine themselves out of harmonium. I think that's accurate. I think if harmony was a thing, a real tangible thing in their world, that every time Trellium bounced up against it, it would be like, that's fun. Maybe react, maybe explode, but you would never have lerasium or atium. It is only because harmony is not harmony.
My question is it only because of Trellium? Like, would the same thing happen with a different metal? Like, if they tried it with steel, or even if they tried it with a different god metal? I'm very curious about how much of this is due to the strong repelling properties of Trellium as well. So it's not just that Harmonium is very reactive, but it's specifically that Harmonium is reacting with an autonomy metal, which is trying to repel and is therefore repelling the two sides of harmony from each other.
That's a really good point, because there is, in the back of everybody's mind, in the back of this entire exploration into the Cosmere, there is one event where we know a thing that was all together,
right,
divided into 16 shards. And what was it that was done to do that division? Seemingly is very similar to what was just done to harmony, that a new element was introduced, in this case Trellium, and harmony, a collective thing, became a subdivided thing, much like the original shattering of Adonalsium.
I'm not sure how much of a comparison I want to make between the splitting here and the splitting of Adonalsium. I am curious what it says about the recombining of Adonalsium. And I think it just all comes down to emulsifiers. You have to have a third thing, as we've talked about in the past. Like, if harmony were to combine with another shard and had a three-legged stool, it would be balanced. There would be an emulsifier in between your ruin and your preservation. It can't just be those two together. So I think that Adonalsium would still be able to combine, as long as, like, maybe you have to have all 16. You can't do it, a little bit at a time. They would have to all be together.
Yeah, so even combining some of the shards, even a few of the shards combined together, may not be the correct way to balance them out compared to a different combination that may create more balance and harmony.
Right, which then would be like more stable and able to be sustained. Whereas I'm sure there are multiple combinations like this in the shards, where if you put, certain ones together, it's going to be really, really difficult to try to hold them together, versus certain other combinations of shards that may go together really well, that you can then maybe hold on to for long enough to, like, attach the rest of the shards into your Adonalsium pile.
During the conversation between Thydakar and Zazed at the end of the book, we have this, quote, "I wonder if there will ever be a way to get atium that isn't traumatic." Zazed didn't reply, end quote. Certainly, Zazed is still playing things close to their chest and not giving as much information as they possibly could.
I don't think there is a way to get atium that isn't traumatic, because it's ruins metal. Something has to be destroyed, basically, to get atium.
There is no destructive element that I know of in simply the pits of Hathin growing atium. It's the, how do you get that atium to the people that is destructive?
Of course.
But, like, if it's just sitting in the ground growing.
Now the question is, how do you get it to the people? Well, you have to explode a huge thing and destroy a bunch of stuff.
I mean, you don't need to do the destroying aspect of the explosion, because, of course, in our world, there are nuclear warheads and there are nuclear power plants. They all fundamentally begin with the same initial splitting of an atom to trigger a reaction, and then it's just, how are you managing that reaction? I think that there is potential here for the people of Scadrial, but once again, that potential might be withheld from them by a questionable god.
Oh, I didn't take it that way at all. You're really against Sazed. This is interesting.
I don't feel like how I can be on his side anymore, other than I liked Zazed at one point. But always skeptical of gods. You should just question them.
Well,
in the
these
Cosmere.
are also lower G gods.
That's what I'm saying. It's you should always be questioning them in the Cosmere. Can't give anybody too much of a pass because of that whole you're holding a shard thing, and we don't know how or why and what that does to a person. But I think that there is now plenty of evidence, the dark shadow of ruin being just the most compelling, that something is clearly wrong. Zazed knows that something is wrong, and Zazed does not want to take certain steps or go down certain directions to address whatever is wrong.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about Harmony.
It's Zazed himself, yes.
Another episode. So I'll save my thoughts for that episode.
Let's focus on Lerasium and Atium, because I feel like this is going to be the most important thing going forward. Thydakar wants Atium. He wants Lerasium, states that very clearly, and makes a compelling argument that Scadrial needs Atium and Lerasium. And we have a way to generate it now at this point.
There is an important caveat to that, I think. Here's a quote. Quote, "Earlier in the week, you all conducted a test," Harmony said, "splitting Harmonium."
The same test our enemies have done 100 or more times.
Yes, but this one was different. I have no idea what happened, but Wax did something different from everyone else trying this, because he didn't merely blow up the room. He created something amazing, end quote. I think this is an indication of intent. Capital I, intent. The thing that is different when Wax does it is that he is specifically intending to create Atium and Lerasium. And that is the ingredient X that allows it to happen.
Where people of the set were simply trying to create the biggest explosion possible. They didn't have the...
Or they weren't... they didn't have their mind sort of in the right place, so to speak.
Certainly, he was able to do something different and act different with a different intent, leading to a different outcome. I don't see why that can't be easily copied, though.
It can if people know that that's what it is, but I don't think anyone knows that that's what it is. It's a secret. Wax didn't really know what he did. Harmony doesn't say, oh, Wax used intent, capital I. You have to intend to blah, blah, blah. Harmony doesn't tell them. Wax doesn't know. So it's still a secret as far as they know. Until Navani shows up and she's like, I know everything about intent.
That is where I want to go next and talk a little bit about how have we seen these other aspects at play in other parts of the Cosmere. Kind of give us a little Cosmere context, if you will. Because the closest thing we have, I believe, is on Rashar with sound in the place of metals.
There were a lot of similarities, I felt, in this specific section of the Lost Metal to Rhythm of War, where they're doing very similar things. They're kind of these parallel tracks, which is why I think that this does start to bring in the role of intent, because as Navani finds out, you can only create an anti-light if you intend to create an anti-light.
And on Rashar, we know that there are the truest tones of the different shards that exist, seemingly the same as the true metals that exist on Scadrial.
The god metals?
The god metals, of course.
Okay.
So we have the pure tones of Rashar, and we have the pure god metals of Scadrial, I think manifesting in a similar way for similar reasons.
Yeah, basically the signature of the shard as it shows up in the physical world.
And then we have Navani, who is able to combine each of those lights, as you said, with a emulsifier, and also to find an anti-light that is reactive with its opposite and can create the explosion of great force that they see in that world. And on Scadrial, we have a combination of these god metals leading to an explosion of force. My question is Harmony an example of a pure, true god metal? Or if it is a combination of atium and lerasium that were emulsified by Zazed the Vessel?
You're asking if he is cultivation light or war light?
Exactly. Is he cultivation light or is he war light?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think we necessarily have enough evidence for either one of those things. I don't know what it takes for a shard to like fully invest a planet.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Odium was not an original shard of Rashar, but he becomes one. Obviously, the original shards on Scadrial were Preservation and Ruin, but Harmony has existed for 300 years on the planet.
Mm-hmm. So is that long
is
enough?
that long enough?
Yeah.
Does that count? Autonomy seems to be able to invest the planet and create its own metal very quickly. So it seems like Harmony would have to be considered a quote-unquote pure metal of Scadrial, but I'm not sure.
These are wonderful questions to think about. You can reach out and let us know exactly what you believe, think, feel.
Yeah, this was a spicy episode. I want to hear everyone's hot takes.
Or your lukewarm takes. If it's
or
just
your
like,
lukewarm takes.
You know what? I like Steris. That's, at this point, just the
or your cold
lukewarmest
takes, yeah.
As Brooke mentioned at the top, we are going to have a part 2 on metallurgy where we look at how the different types of metallurgy were used throughout the Lost Metal. And as we brought up multiple times, we're going to have an episode just looking at Harmony and going to bring in more of these spicy takes, this discord, if you will.
Yeah, look forward to another spicy episode here on Cosmere Conversations. It doesn't get spicy here very often, but sometimes I like to turn up the heat. Thanks for listening, and until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.